All right, I'm happy to have on Theo Lawson from the Spokesman Review. He covers Gonzaga basketball. Theo, how's it going? How's the sort of condensed off season been for you to this point?
Good. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It's been pretty busy. The first month or two after the season ends, usually the first week or two, there's players entering the portal, Gonzaga players entering the portal. So I think within the first 10 days of the offseason, all three players who entered the portal had already gone in. So tracking that, and then also just tracking all the different players that Gonzaga is looking to add via the portal, and seeing who has Gonzaga on their list, or who's reached out to who, and so just monitoring all that takes quite a bit of time the first month or two, and then obviously Gonzaga is rebuilding a roster, and then has quite a bit to replace. So it's been pretty busy, and then starting to slow down. And now it's more just about maybe filling out those last few spots, and also preparing for the NBA draft, and then looking at some of the guys who could hear their names called next month.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah.
yeah, it's kind of amazing. It's because this Gonzaga team obviously has lost a lot from this past year's team, most notably Drew Timme, maybe the greatest Zag of them all. And just thinking about just the way this kind of roster has been rebuilt, because it looks like definitely like this has been a retooled team, and it looks like a team that's going to be able to hit the ground running. To kind of speak a little bit on just kind of the job that you feel like Mark Few has done to kind of rebuild this roster in a pretty quick fashion.
Yeah, I think Gonzaga has been a place that players want to play, come to, and obviously with Mark Few's track record with transfers, he's obviously shown the ability to bring players in, and kind of make them fit his system, and so obviously players like Andrew Nembhard, he's a prime example of a transfer who came in and played 2 years, went to the national championship game, and was a really highly valuable player for them, and then gets drafted by the Indiana Pacers, and he's now starting in the NBA. Starting a lot of games in the NBA, not every game, but so obviously, for Ryan Nembhard, for example, that's his older brother, so he sees Andrew have success, and have the ability to do that at Gonzaga, so why not do the same thing? So it's been an interesting time to kind of follow with more players entering the portal, and then obviously Mark Few is filling more spots than he normally has to, but it's still kind of that balance of adding players via the portal, and signing high school players who might not play right away, but if they can kind of stick around, and that's obviously a big question in this day and age, if someone's going to stay around for 3 or 4 years. But when players have stuck around at Gonzaga for 3 or 4 years, obviously Drew Timme is an example of that. They really do develop with Mark Few, so it's been kind of a combination of adding some pretty good high school players that a lot of people don't probably know, not like Chet Holmgren or Jalen Suggs, but hopefully
Sure.
they can develop, and then adding guys who can contribute right away, like Ryan Nembhard, and Graham Ike, and potentially Steele Venters.
Yeah, and just thinking about just guys like Graham Ike and Steele Venters, them coming in, but the one piece it seemed like maybe that was missing from last year's team, that was maybe the biggest missing piece, was like that point guard play, that consistent point guard play, which it seems that Andrew Nembhard is probably going to be that guy to kind of be able to fill that role, and he feels like that he was the missing piece that they would have had for last year's team. So obviously, like he's kind of like he's the one that everyone kind of looks at as being like obviously like the biggest of the transfers that's come in. Kind of talk about like that addition. Obviously, Andrew's obviously a big component to the reason he's there, but just in general, what you feel like Ryan's going to be able to bring to that team.
Yeah, he is a pure point guard. I mean, last season they tried to make Nolan Hickman the point guard, and I think we kind of saw how that went, and didn't go quite as planned, and maybe Nolan just needed another year to kind of develop in that role, and maybe he would have been a better point guard for him next year. But now they have a true point guard in Ryan Nembhard, and so Nolan Hickman can play off the ball. I assume that's what Mark Few is going to do, but they also have the option to still play Nolan at points, and they have a few different guys who can kind of play combo guard positions, and play off the ball, play on the ball, and that's what Mark likes to do. So, but obviously just having a guy who can operate in the pick and roll, and a really good 3-point shooter. I think Ryan is a little bit better of a 3-point shooter than Andrew Nembhard was, and Andrew is a pretty good 3-point shooter. So you add that. I definitely think they upgrade at the point guard spot. It's going to be kind of building around that to see what else they can do to replace guys like Julian Strother and Drew Timme.
Yeah, and I feel like that's almost like the kind of the monumental task of like you can't really replace a Drew Timme because of just the impact he had the on the program, the way the team was kind of built around him to an extent. and just kind of talk about like what we should expect maybe from these other guys, or maybe what this team might look like next year with a really completely almost new roster.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a different team with replacing 3 to 4 starters, and obviously Drew Timmy being the biggest one of those, and hopefully Graham Ike can come in and fill those shoes. And he's not similar as far as playing style, but he's going to kind of get his points the same way. He's not going to be a 3-point shooter who's stepping out and making people guard him at the 3-point line. He's going to get most of his buckets in the post and kind of do a lot of the same things that Drew Timmy did. He's not going to be a huge rim protector. He's probably a little bit better of a rebounder than Drew Timmy was. So hopefully you can upgrade a little bit as far as rebounding goes. But he's gonna bully down low and score a lot of his points inside the paint. So it's still going to be kind of the same look where you probably have Anton Watson playing the 4 and Graham Ike playing the 5, and then you really have a front court that's going to be able to score inside, but not potentially hurt teams from the perimeter. Anton Watson did kind of improve as a 3-point shooter last year, so if he can kind of add that to his repertoire, he becomes really valuable playing that 4 spot, especially if Ike's playing the 5 as kind of another non-shooter. But also Ben Gregg will come off the bench, and he's probably developed a little bit too. So he's a viable starting option potentially. He's someone who can shoot the 3 and make teams guard him out there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of the guys I wanted to ask about. And first off, I felt like the biggest offseason move almost seemed like kind of like definitely not in Spokane definitely not in Spokane. It's not an underrated move, but definitely maybe nationally, the return of Anton Watson, because I feel like that continuity and what he brought to that team is going to be so invaluable again to going into next year, let alone like talk about his defense, but what we saw from his offensive game and how that developed toward the end of the year and how he's got to see more and more of what he's capable of on that end of the floor. Do you kind of expect to kind of see him be able to have that more of that opportunity going into this year? Or are we going to kind of see him kind of fall back into the role that we saw him for the most part last year?
Yeah, I think they need him to take a step. I think he has to become a better 3-point shooter, and he did show hints of that later in the season. I think he shot somewhere between 35 and 40% the second half of the season. He obviously not a high volume 3-point shooter, but he certainly added that a little bit to his game. So if he can do that, that's huge. But just being able to score like he did last year, and I really think he took advantage of teams doubling Drew Timmy, and so he was able to lead the conference in field goal percentage, but a lot of that's because of the attention that Drew Timmy commands. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens if you don't have one of the country's top low post scorers down there, where if Anton's going to be guarded differently because you don't have to pay attention to Drew Timmy down there. So but maybe Graham Ike can kind of take that pressure off Anton a little bit too, and so he's commanding the double teams now that Drew's gone. So obviously Anton has to take another step. He has to be one of the best defenders in the conference. I don't see this being a great defensive team again. Just looking at the pieces coming in, these aren't guys that are known for their defense. When you look at Ryan Nembhard, Steele Venters, it's going to be very similar to last year's team in that regard. So Anton does have to carry more of a scoring load probably, and obviously you're not going to rely on 20 to 25 points a game from Drew Timmy, and obviously Julian Strother took a step last year too as a scorer. So he's going to have to do quite a bit, and he's going to also have to be a leader. He's a pretty quiet guy. He's not very outspoken. Drew Timmy was kind of the vocal leader of that team last year, and they didn't have many vocal guys. So I think Anton kind of being the 5th-year guy, the veteran from Spokane, he's got to kind of take a hold of some of those responsibilities and improve as a leader, and obviously still be kind of the defensive anchor as well as improving offensively and kind of replacing some of what Drew Timmy did.
You think like for Anton, like especially early on in the year, it's going to be really important for him to kind of like almost step into that role because he's one of the few returners, or not few returners, but he's one of the guys who is in that first 7 that in the rotation. And I guess like, is there going to be more? Obviously there's going to be that expectation that he makes that step in, but is he going to be leaned on a little bit more heavily in that first month or couple months of the season, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. He's obviously a known commodity. He's been around the program. He knows Mark Few's system better than anyone because he's been around for 5 years, and he's known Mark Few actually since middle school, 6th, 7th grade. I think he's played with Mark Few's sons his whole life, and then went to Gonzaga Prep here in Spokane too. So he's just kind of the Spokane guy, and everyone knows him, and so he really does have to step into that role, that leadership role, and kind of teach the younger guys, teach the transfers how to operate within Mark Few's system. I'm guessing Drew Timme did a really good job of that when he was around, but he's not now. So Anton is kind of the elder statesman of this team. When you look at the returning guys, it's kind of just him, Nolan Hickman, Ben Gregg, as far as guys who got rotation minutes last year. So he's obviously the oldest of those three. I still think of Nolan as a pretty young player in his career. Ben Gregg obviously just kind of cracked the rotation last year. So Anton does have to step up and teach guys how to be college basketball players and also shoulder some of those offensive and defensive responsibilities.
Yeah, and there's definitely obviously a win now mentality that's always there at Gonzaga. But then there's also still, like you talked about, some of the younger guys or some of like that you still want to be able to develop players and keep them in the system and whatnot. And then that makes me think about Ben Gregg, Braden Huff, and some of the others that have been here for a couple of years. And where do you think maybe like how their roles are going to change because of the transfers? How much of an opportunity maybe will some of these guys get? Because I mean, this, especially with even not only transfers, but also some of the freshmen coming in, it feels like that it's going to be, again, really tough to actually break this rotation.
Yeah, it's always a really tight rotation with Mark Few. He doesn't typically play more than 8 to 9 players, and that often gets cut down to 7 to 8 in the postseason. And then a lot of times he's maybe bringing one guy off the bench deep in the NCAA tournament if he kind of likes his 6 that he has, and those guys are playing heavy minutes. So it's really hard to break into that rotation. And when you kind of look at the pieces that they have, it is going to be hard for guys like Braden Huff. I think Ben Gregg will be in the rotation, but Braden Huff, Caden Perry, assuming Caden Perry gets back and healthy, he's going to be someone that they possibly can rely on as a rim protector. They don't really have that on the roster. Anton Watson isn't a rim protector. Graham Ike is not a rim protector. Ben Gregg isn't. So that's kind of what Caden Perry brings. He's gotten a lot of comparisons to Brandon Clark as far as their playing styles, but we don't know if he's healthy. He hasn't had a healthy back in 2 years at Gonzaga, so we'll kind of see what his recovery looks like. But also you're looking at guys like you said, Braden Huff, Jun Sokyo. I'm going to get that name right by the time the season starts. He's a South Korean forward who joined the team midway through last season. Has had a lot of international success. He's an older guy, so maybe he can step in right away. And even though he's a new college basketball player, he's older than a lot of the newcomers on the roster. So we'll kind of see what he can bring in, and potentially he's competing with Ben Gregg for rotation minutes, and maybe Steele Venters at the 3, but there's not a lot of room for minutes. And then you look at the newcomers, Alex Tui from Australia. I really kind of see him taking more of a redshirt season. I don't see a role for him right away with the front court, and also Dusty Stromer, a 4-star from California, who I think kind of has to play right away. He's probably going to be one of the first guards off the bench because they don't really have a deep backcourt right now. I still think there's a chance Mark Few adds 1 or 2 more pieces, whether that's an international play or one more player in the portal as far as a guard goes to kind of back up Nembhard and Hickman, because it is a pretty light front court or backcourt right now as far as depth goes. But I do see Stromer coming off the bench playing some minutes as a true freshman. So we'll kind of see what happens. But it's going to be a short rotation again, I imagine, and so it's hard to break into that 8 to 9 man group, and that's why you see some of these players transferring.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about this rotation, or just because I almost feel like we're going to see a lot of different combinations early on in the year because there are so many new pieces on this team and trying to figure out what's going to fit best. Obviously, we know Gonzaga, we haven't seen a full schedule yet, but we know that Gonzaga always has like a really tough non-conference. They're going to see, we already know some of the big games. Obviously, Kentucky is on the schedule already as one of those big ones. Should we expect to see maybe almost a little bit kind of the growing pains like we saw toward the beginning of last year, where we're still kind of seeing like some of these mix and matches and trying to figure out what's going to fit best?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to be a really different team. Obviously, every year now it seems like every team in college basketball is looks so different. Maybe with the exception of St. Mary's, they always kind of seem to be the same every year and have a lot of guys returning. It seems every year and a lot of continuity. But Gonzaga doesn't have that. There are so many unknowns with this team as far as how the transfers are going to fit in. Whether Graham Ike is going to be fully healthy after missing all of last season for Wyoming, how Anton's role changes. So we'll kind of see what happens early in the season, but they do have another loaded non-conference schedule. I mentioned the Kentucky game. They're going to the Maui Invitational in November. They have UConn coming to Seattle, play at Climate Pledge Arena, and I think Washington and Seattle is kind of the other known road game right now as far as the non-con goes. But it's going to be another tough schedule where you're probably going to play Purdue, UCLA, Kansas, and potentially Syracuse and Maui. So it's going to be probably another non-conference where they might have to lose 2 to 3 games to kind of get to a place where they have that roster continuity and chemistry and everything that Mark Few's teams usually seem to have by the time WCC play starts. So we'll kind of see what happens, and they still have to round out the roster and then potentially make 1 or 2 more additions. That they have 2 scholarships open, so they can still add some things. But it is going to be a new team, and like we saw last year, a lot of the fans overreacted when Gonzaga has 3 losses in their first game. That happens to most teams in college basketball. Most teams lose 3 games in non-conference play, but Gonzaga fans are obviously a little spoiled. So when you have that standard that you're kind of used to, it's a little bit scary when you start to drop games so early on. But I think obviously those games help them, and obviously if you can end your season in the Elite Eight, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, I was thinking about that very thing. It's like once they lose like 2 or 3, if they lose 2 or 3 early on, it's going to be the sky is falling, the season is over, and I mean you were playing. It's like these were top level teams, these were tournament teams, and it took them some time, but they figured it out. And obviously, again, you mentioned like you end in the Elite Eight, you're doing something right. Mm-hmm. And this is a team that's been in the Sweet 16. I think it's now 8 straight seasons. Yeah. So this is a team that does know what it's doing. Mark Few knows how to put together a team, and even if it seems like that it might be falling off a cliff, they seem to always figure it out. Mm-hmm. So as we're starting to kind of like talk about the season, but then there's also the big picture of what's been happening with some of the realignment talk and just some of that. How between there's been rumors of like, obviously the Big 12 is the biggest one. We've seen Commissioner Yormak actually talk specifically about Gonzaga and bringing that up. What sort of chatter has there been about what might be happening on that front?
Yeah, it's really unclear where that kind of stands right now. It seems like every time Gonzaga played a Big 12 team, Chris Stanford, the AD here, met with Brett Yormark, who was usually at those games. So I came up a few times last season, obviously before they played Tennessee in that preseason exhibition. That was kind of the first time that it sounds like that Stanford and Yormark met about potentially joining the conference. So it's not really clear where it stands. I'm just kind of basing what I think off of different reports I've seen, but it sounds like the Big 12 is maybe a little bit more interested in adding UConn right now. UConn obviously has a football program, not much of a football program, but a football program. Right. Gonzaga doesn't have that, so Gonzaga can't really bring that to the Big 12, and so that takes a little bit of luster away. But still, I think if you have a chance to add Gonzaga and make the conference stronger, it's not a bad idea, and it's something that they have to consider. I just don't know if all these Big 12 schools want to be traveling to Spokane once a year and then traveling to Spokane in January and February when it's 20 degrees outside, and also it's quite the workload for Gonzaga to be traveling to the East Coast and traveling to Morgantown and Florida, and it's not going to be. I don't think it'll be as bad as people think. Gonzaga makes these trips all the time. They're going to Maui. They go to Kentucky. Last year they went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They went to Texas a few times. So it's not like they're not making these trips already. But to do it, a few times during conference play is going to be tough, and then it's going to be also really tough on the non-revenue sports as far as making those trips. So I'm not sure how feasible that is, but it's something that I think Gonzaga has to be kind of interested in and just position themselves to join one of these conferences if there's an opening. The Pac-12 is also an option potentially, and so I think the Pac-12 really should look at Gonzaga because without USC and UCLA, potentially Arizona, Colorado, it's going to be a really it's going to be a lot weaker as far as men's basketball goes as a conference. So you lose a lot with losing those 4 to 5 teams, and so I think adding Gonzaga and potentially maybe creating some kind of West Coast power basketball conference would be kind of neat if you could have Gonzaga, St. Mary's, UNLV, San Diego State, all those kind of programs in the same league. I think it would be kind of the only way to keep West Coast basketball interesting before all these teams leave for bigger conferences.
Right. All right. Well, I think that'll I'll do it. Thanks, Theo, for hopping on. Thanks for talking some Zags basketball. I'm sure we'll talk down the road once we get a little bit closer to the season and we're getting a little bit clearer idea of what these rosters look like, what these teams going to look like. Thanks again for hopping on, and we'll catch up soon.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks for having me.